I wake up this particular morning to Go playing in my head, the song Go by Asia from the third album, Astra. And there's nothing really too special or out of the ordinary about that. Very often I do wake up to music playing in my head, although it's usually not a complete song recognizable. It's riff, melody, bass line, drum pattern, sometimes even a vocal, and then I just let it play, and then during the day it builds up and I find what it is. But this time it was Go playing loud and clear. And again, I didn't thought much of it because there's nothing really anything out of the ordinary. That day before work I had to make a pit stop at ShopRite. I was living on the east side, and that's one of the big supermarket chains. And interestingly, surprisingly enough, they have a tendency to play not complete crap or garbage like what you would hear on a normal classic rock station. That's what plays in a store. I forgot which song they were playing, but I know which it wasn't. And it was a song off of Alpha, Asia's Alpha, which was not Don't Cry and not The Heat Goes On, right? The usual suspect. So it struck me that it's kind of, I forgot already which it was. It was probably not True Colors, not Midnight Sun, but anyway, it was song off of Alpha. That kind of struck me as odd. But nothing doing. I finish what I have to do, go back to work, fire up the machine at work, and it picks up right where it left off the previous day. Wherever YouTube wants to take me, usually it's good, and they're playing Year a Day off of Uriah Heep's Return to Fantasy. Great album, great song. Again, I didn't think much of it. Day goes by, time to go home. I get a phone call notification that I have to go arrange something. I go to do what I need to do, and of course it drags on, and there's bureaucracy, whatnot. Everything takes longer than it should. I'm finally finishing what I need to do. I'm heading home, and I didn't have the nerves to start cooking or eating leftovers at home. As usual, I just figured I'll stop by somewhere, and I wanted to go for a chicken sandwich, which I almost never do. Not my cup of tea, by a long shot. And so on the way home, there is a place where I can stop, and I knew that by the time I get there, they'd be closing. But I knew the guys who work there, so I pick up the phone and say, "Hey guys, can you fix me up a sandwich? I'll come pick it up right after closing." That's exactly what happens. Front door is already closed. I go from the back door. I knew those guys really well, so the owner was a friend of mine. They give me the sandwich, and as soon as I step in there, they're washing the floors, getting ready to leave already, and there is Starless playing. This is kind of surreal, It's like a small, tiny hole in the wall, tiny chicken place. The guys are washing the floors, putting away the deep fryers, whatnot, and the Starless is going on. It's like struck me like, wow! You couldn't have surprised me with something more unusual, right? You would expect something much more popular and plain vanilla in a place like this. Finally, I get home, and I have a little craving for Rainbow. I said, let me put up a Rainbow record. I go flip between the records, and the first record my hands touch is Danger Money by UK. Great album. UK, and like, what is going on? And it's at this point, although there was kind of like a faint voice in the back of my head, but I still didn't put everything together, and I put on Danger Money, and that's when it starts to kind of hit me that shame on me. It's June 12th, and I forgot that it's John Wetton's birthday. John Wetton, what a phenomenal crazy musician, has been in so many bands, so many records, a true workaholic. There is, I think, throughout his career, at least one full-length, full album's worth of work per year, if not more. But before we go into Wetton, let's take a look at another guy who is also a great composer, a guy with a great booming voice, also a bassist, and his name is, of course, you guessed it, Greg Lake. Greg Lake was born a couple of years before Wetton, I think 2 years, and he also released records a couple of years before. He explodes on a scene with Court of the Crimson King, a perennial favorite. Anyone who's into prog rock knows that record. Amazing songs in the Court of the Crimson King, Lament, I Talk to the Wind, Epitaph, all of these insane great songs, and he does a great deal of singing them and playing the bass. And if I'm not mistaken, he actually picked up the bass specifically for that record because he was more of a guitar player, even though he's more kind of known or is publicized as a bass player, but he's by trade or by education he's more of a guitar player. But anyway, he exposed to the scene with Court of the Crimson King, and the following year they release In the Wake of Poseidon, which just so happens to be my favorite King Crimson record, which is an odd choice. I admit that. Most Crimson fans will go for the first one, of course, Court of the Crimson King. There's a lot of fans of Stardust and Bible Black. There's a lot of fans of Red, Islands especially. Some people will even pick Larkstones in Aspect, which is kind of also a weird choice. But I really look at In the Wake of Poseidon as a correction or rectification of Court of the Crimson King. So everything is a little bit more thought, more worked out, more polished, much less improvisation, or at least doesn't sound so kind of jammy. So I just prefer Wake of Poseidon. Pictures of a City, Cadence of Cascade, real crazy record. But anyway, I understand that this is a minority opinion. And incidentally, if I'm not mistaken, Lake didn't play bass on that record. He only sang. Kind of interesting and unusual. I think it was Giles, the drummer's brother, who played the bass. I should have looked it up, but I'm just talking off the cuff here. Then Greg leaves the band, and with Keith Emerson and Carl Palmer, he creates Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which some people, when they listen to, they could say, what's the use? This is so similar to King Crimson, right? You typically, the three poster boys or the three archetypal 70s prog bands tend to be Yes, Genesis, and ELP. And then on the sides you have kind of these weird bands like King Crimson and maybe Colosseum too, Jethro Tull, things that kind of Rush maybe don't fall into the mainstream clear-cut cookie cutter prog. But isn't that the idea, that it shouldn't be a cookie cutter? But anyway, early ELP, to me at least, bears so much resemblance to King Crimson that sometimes you ask, why did he have to leave? But I think it's because of the classical influences. So they took over so many classical themes and so many classical works that they want to work on and make it a little bit more polished and less improvisational, less jazzy. Not in the purest jazz form, but in the jazz, in the meaning of letting everyone kind of introduce their own ideas and then the others join in and do that interplay that's very common on King Crimson, whereas ELP is a little bit more planned. So you can look at ELP as the more structured version of King Crimson, if you will. And of course, from the first record, they have the famous song, probably their most famous song, Fanfare. I'm sorry, not Fanfare. Lucky Man, which is probably the least interesting thing they ever did. But anyway, it's not very uncommon to some bands to have their least interesting work being the most famous. But then you have the great songs. You have Tank, you have the Three Fates, Knife Edge, really great, like I said, kind of like a great polished version of King Crimson. I think it's not surprising that I like this record, since Wake of Poseidon is my favorite King Crimson. As an aside, I always had kind of a love-hate relationship with ELP. Sometimes I love them and I listen to them and I had the records, and sometimes they just almost made me want to vomit. Maybe not that bad, but I just wouldn't listen for long periods of time. So kind of on and off. But the first ones I definitely like. And then they played the Isle of Wight concert, which was very, very famous. I think Free had their debut there, their big break. Maybe Peter Green, I think he just left Mail. So great, great concert, and they sort of had their introduction to the world. And so let's jump back now to John Wetton, who steps on to the scene as a member of Mogul Thrash. Mogul Thrash, unfortunately, is not as known as it should be known. Crazy, crazy, insane band. This is sort of the band that epitomizes that idea that sprouted sometime in the 70s that you could somehow blend fusion and prog. And commercially it never really worked out, but as far as records, some of them are just amazing, amazing. Colosseum 2, like I said, is a very, very good example of that. But Mogul Thrash, it's kind of like a fusion with prog in it. Of course, the well-known song is Sleeping in the Kitchen, but the whole record is just amazing. And Wetton's bass is great. Phenomenal record. I think everybody owes it to themselves to at least listen to it. Buying it, a little problematic. It's an expensive record, but I think it exists in CD, so if someone wants a physical copy, that's an option. The vinyls are pretty expensive. I didn't look at prices in a while, but original copies I think can run you 200 bucks or so. And there was a sort of a reprint in the past decade or so that's also not cheap. Anyway, so this is Wetton stepping up on the scene. This is 71, the year also that ELP released 2 records, Tarkus and Pictures at an Exhibition. Tarkus needs no introduction. This is kind of like a fan favorite among all prog fans. You have the first side, which is just one big work, if you will. Great record. It has this iconic record cover on it, and then you have the shorter bits on the other side. Very, very, very solid record, at least the first side. The second side is not bad either. Pictures at an Exhibition, not 100% my cup of tea. In my opinion, it should have been a little bit more faithful to the original. This is a rig by Mussorgsky, which was inspired by an actual exhibition, so the pictures have their themes, and I think that the LP also cut out a couple. Maybe I should have looked into it a little bit before talking about it. Anyway, Pictures at an Exhibition is not my favorite ELP record, but it's not bad either. So it's pretty nice listening to it on occasion. And then at that time, Wetton, Mogul Thrash falls apart. Unfortunately, it doesn't succeed commercially, and the band doesn't keep together. Wetton joins an established band in this kind of music family, and they release Fearless. Cool record. If you know the record, it has this cutout record sleeve that you can flip like a book, and each one is a little bit more, an extra line of cutouts with the pictures of the of the band members, kind of a gimmick. The record is pretty solid, what you would expect from their family. Not a huge fan. I really only have these records because they have John Wetton on them. But they're definitely worth a spin. Maybe not every day, not every week, but a couple of times a year. It's good. Fearless is kind of like a solid, proggy, little fusiony, crazy, psychedelic-y kind of record. Some good songs, some good pieces on it. Not not everybody's cup of tea, admittedly. Then in '72, ELP released Trilogy, also one of their famous records, and kind of steps back a little bit to the first one. Reminds me a lot of times of their first record, and then this is before releasing one of their most famous ones, which is Brain Salad Surgery, Carnival 9. This is kind of a very celebrating the famous record, and I also liked it. I think of all ELP records, that's the one that I listen to the most. But Trilogy is also very nice, a little bit unusual, calmer and tamer than what you would expect from those guys. But solid records, all of them. In the meantime, Familiar releases another record, Bandstand, which is takes kind of a big step back from the craziness and the madness, and it's not a mainstream record, but it's a lot closer to mainstream. So you have more closer to bluesy rockers, and they tuned down a little bit the prog and the fusion element. The sound also became a little bit more corporate, if you will. It doesn't sound corporate, but it made a step a little bit into that direction. Next up, Wetton leaves family and goes to help out Roxy Music. Those, if you know, kind of also like a weird sort of band, Brian Eno's band, and he helps them out with the live recording. They didn't have a bassist, so he stands in for the bassist, and then Wetton makes his big move. He joins King Crimson, same band that Greg Lake played in a couple of years earlier, and they record Lark's Tongues in Aspic. Very, very weird, crazy kind of record. Some Crimson fans hate it, a lot of them do love it. Kind of a split mentality record, that there's long passages there, that there's not much that you hear going on, not loud, and so you really have to digest this record. This is not an everyday listen. This is not what you would listen to driving on the way to work. This is something to sit down and listen to it, shut the lights, and just concentrate on the record. Highly recommended to at least give it a listen. But if it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. You'd be in the majority. Next up, they release, of course, Starless and Bible Black, which ironically doesn't have Starless on it, which that would come up on the next record. Again, another great iconic King Crimson record. The following year, they released Red. Again, another crazy King Crimson record where really Wetton just shines, and all of them do. And then there are a couple of live recordings. USA, which I think was released not much after it was recorded, but then there are other recordings that surface in the mid to late 90s, recordings with Wetton on it, live recordings. During this whole time, Emerson, Lake and Palmer are pretty much vegetating, so they had these huge grandiose tours with the, Emerson's grand piano flipping over and all this crazy stuff, huge tours with many dates, so they needed a big break, which was a smart move. A lot of bands could have been saved with taking such breaks. Maybe 3 years is too much, but for about 3 years, no one hears about Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I guess they had enough money that they didn't have to do anything, so they just each one did their own projects, and Greg Lake is not known to me that he would do anything very major or special. Anyway, in the meantime, Wetton leaves King Crimson, or Robert Fripp fires him. Actually, Robert Fripp disbanded King Crimson altogether in '74. And Wetton makes kind of an odd career move. He joins Uriah Heep, and when he is asked to leave, not surprisingly, that was for personal reasons. So he just didn't fit in with the band, which anyone who knows a little bit about Wetton and Uriah Heep can kind of see it. I can see him getting along with either Ken Hensley or Mick Box, not even Lee Kerslake, who was still in the band at the time. But they released 2 great records, Return to Fantasy, which is universally accepted by Uriah Heep fans as a great record, maybe not as great as their most iconic ones, Magician's Birthday and what's the one, the name of the other one, the Wizard, anyway, the one before, the one after Look at Yourself is very often regarded as one of Heap's best records. Sweet Freedom with Pilgrim on it. What's the one with Poet Justice on it? I forget already. Demons and Wizards. There you go. Demons and Wizards. So, but still, Return to Fantasy is regarded as a classic Byron era record, whereas High and Mighty has some great songs, great music, but it's not real Heap. You can feel that they're tired. You can feel the tension. You have some very solid music, Little Miss Misty Eyes, and all of these songs. The songs are good, but it's just not a record that catches you, grabs you as what you want to get from Heap, which is okay, but that to many kind of signals the beginning of the decline of the band. Although John Lawton really revived it, and they released 3 phenomenal records afterwards. But anyway, Wetton's tenure in Uriah Heep lasts only 2 records, at which time ELP on their end get back into the studio and start working again, and they release Works, which is kind of this grandiose wannabe pseudo classical piece, which again a lot of people love, a lot of people can't stand. I'm also on a fence on it. Sometimes I want to hear it, but most of the time it's okay to look at the record and okay, it's here and I'm okay. Works 2 is in some ways a repetition of it, a lot of leftovers from the Works 1, a little bit more workable, a little bit more palatable, but also sounds a little bit like a tired record, like a little bit overhashed. And I think that they started to kind of run dry of these grandiose, super crazy, proggy, psyche, jazzy elements, and they were starting to run short of ideas and becoming repetitive. And so they released Love Beach. Love Beach is a record that is regularly trashed by everyone, including the band themselves and critics, of course, and fans. Nobody likes it. Very poppy, commercial sounding record. I don't think it's that terrible. Do I listen to it every day? No. Every week? Neither. But I don't think it's a bad record. It's kind of very poppy, very polished, very commercial, corporate sounding, love songs, haha, happy-go-lucky, beach, everything that was kind of going late 70s, before the 80s. But it's not terrible at all. And actually Greg Lake picked up another song from it, It Hurts, and he did it on his solo record, but more on that later. But I don't think that record deserves all the crap that it's being slung at it. At any rate, I don't think this record is really as terrible as its reputation is. I just don't want to write it off as non-existent in the ELP catalog. It's there, it kind of belongs there, they did it. Yes, it's an oddball, it's different, but in my opinion, not as horrible and not as deserving of its criticism. Anyway, let's go back to John Wetton now. At this point, John Wetton stands in for a Roxy Music live record. Actually, what I made a mistake. What I said in before King Crimson, he was working on a Brian Eno solo record, not Roxy Music. The Roxy Music live album was now in '76 when they did the big tour, and they also released a live album on which you can hear Wetton playing. Then in '78, Wetton forms a crazy prog group with Alan Holdsworth. True psycho. The guy's a complete weirdo, but personally and musically. But musically a complete genius. And he already played in bands before, and he was in Soft Machine, I think. Some other crazy, also psych prog, very jazzy kind of player. He then went on, was it before or after? I think it was a little bit before. He was in Coliseum, in Tempest. So that's John Heisman's band that was between Coliseum 1 and Coliseum 2. So Holdsworth was in Tempest. They're recording, I think, one studio and one live album, if I'm not mistaken. And then he joins John Wetton's UK. Crazy, crazy band, and they release UK, which is their most famous, most acclaimed record, Danger Money. A lot of people don't like it so much. It doesn't have a guitarist. It has Eddie Jobson on electric violin, who is, I think, from Roxy Music. And then, of course, the live record, Night After Night. They play all of their great, the great classic, Easy Money, Mental Medication, Nothing to Lose, all of these great songs. So even if you're not a UK fan, but you should at least have Night After Night, the live record, and possibly the first one. Danger Money, you're not a diehard Wetton and UK fan, you can skip that, but still a very solid record. And at that point, Wetton records his first record, Crossfire, which is pretty good, definitely worth a listen. Some good songs on it. The big one would come later, though. At this point, Greg Lake starts his solo project, and he takes on Gary Moore, kind of an unlikely combination. Gary Moore, most people wouldn't think of him as belonging there with Greg Lake, although Gary Moore had his share of kind of fusion and prog stuff, especially with Colosseum 2, but even with Skid Row, his first band, and his first solo record, Grinding Stone, and in fact even in the one, his breakthrough record, Back on the Streets, there's a lot of kind of fusionist stuff in there. So he never really went away from there, and actually, in fact, even the following record, G-Force, the one that he did after he left Thin Lizzy for the third or fourth time, G-Force, admittedly, it's much more of a disco funk kind of oriented, but it's not completely unfusiony either. But anyway, Greg Lake takes Gary Moore and releases a pretty solid record. It's just called Greg Lake, and it opens with Nuclear Attack, and it has some great Gary Moore playing on it, some great songs. They take back It Hurts from Love Beach. So really very listenable, very good record. And then the live album from that tour, King Biscuit Flower Hour, which I think wasn't released until the mid-90s, is also very worth listening to, because they have versions of Court of the Crimson King and things from other past Greg Lake projects, which Gary Moore plays. So especially if you're a Gary Moore fan, it definitely behooves and is worthwhile to listen to that. The next record is Maneuvers. I don't like that record. In my opinion, really the only reason to have that record is to complete the series. If you're a big diehard Gary Moore fan like I am, and you just want to have the entire series. Gary Moore, by the way, didn't play on that entire record. I think it's just 7 or 8 songs out of 10, if I'm not mistaken. And then Lake stands in for Wetton in Asia. So Wetton's record company was not happy with Asia selling only 4 million copies of Alpha. They wanted 10 million, like the first record. So they fired Wetton. If I have the story right, I'm pretty sure that even if it's not true, it's relatively close to the truth. Anyway, Lake stands in for Wetton for a series of concerts in Japan, 4 or 5 dates if I'm not mistaken, and does a pretty good job of it. So pretty impressive work there, and at least it's documented that there is a version of Asia with Greg Lake instead of John Wetton. At that point, Wetton does another weird and unusual career move. He joins Wishbone Ash as a permanent member, interestingly enough, and releases Number the Brave, a very un-Wishbone Ashy record. Number of the Brave is pretty much Wishbone Ash's Love Beach. So kind of 80s commercial sounding poppy bouncy, little funky record. This is not Argus. This is not Wishbone Ash's first 3 or 4 records by any stretch of the word. But it's not a bad record. Kind of a bit more ragged, a little aggressive rock, not heavy metal, but has that kind of flair. And Wetton does a great job there. I like the record, but again, I'm not a die-hard Wishbone Ash guy. So not only that I'm writing it off, but I listened to that record. And that was kind of in the period that Wishbone Ash was considered to have lost its direction or sold out, as a lot of fans say. But I don't think this record is nearly bad. Not only it's not bad, it's a very good record, if not great. But again, it's not classic Wishbone Ash, so that's not, if that's what you're expecting, go back, listen to Argus and these things. And then, of course, Wetton forms Asia. Now, Asia is very often accused, and rightly so, of being a corporate band. The concept and the idea was conceived in the mind of business people in the record company, David Geffen and the other big guy there, John Caldona or Caldner, one of these guys. So they chose the musicians, they chose the name of the band, they sort of told them what the vision was. Nevertheless, I refuse to call Asia a plastic band. They wrote the songs, they played the songs, they executed them. Yes, the production was done by Mike Stone, known for the poppy kind of stuff, Mega Million selling. But even though Asia is not a prog per se band as you would expect from these guys, right? Steve Howe and Carl Palmer. It's not a bad record by any stretch of the word. First Asia record, great record. I'm not writing off Alpha either. Weaker, way more commercial. They made a step in the wrong direction. And then you have Astra, which in my opinion, despite not having Steve Howe, is a better record. I think that the songs are punchier, better written. That's where Go coming from. And there's a whole bunch of other songs that are very good and very strong on Astra. At this point, I don't know if it started chronologically here, but whenever Wetton was interviewed about this and they spoke to him about these topics, that Asia was kind of a band cobbled together by the corporate heads, he would always say that, that there's no formula. If there was a formula, everybody would do that. Well, he just was not telling the truth. Of course, there is a formula, and of course, the formula is being employed over and over and over again. It just doesn't explode each and every time, because it's not possible. There can be one number one, and then can be only so many singles, so many albums that sell mega millions. So there is a formula. It's just that the formula is not guaranteed to bring in the fiscal and the fame kind of success that people are always chasing, right? It's the same with let's just say sweets or candy bars. You have Snickers. You have a million of the same crap on the market. They have different wrapper, different brand name, but it's the same garbage inside. One of them sells millions, the others don't. But it doesn't mean that there's no formula. Of course there is a formula, and the formula is even today. Why does all music sound so formulaic? Because everybody following the formula. So sorry, John Wetton, you just not telling the truth about that one. But anyway, this takes us to about 85 when ELP wakes up again. Carl Palmer doesn't want to join the project, so they recruit Cozy Powell. Pretty unlikely. I mean, there's a lot of drummers with P, right? Neil Peart and Simon Phillips would have been a little bit more logical choices, but they took Cozy Powell, and to his and their credit, he did a fine job of it. ELP, a very, 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 very weird and unusual record, pretty much in the same vein like we were talking before, the formula. That there is kind of a commercial formula, but there is also the very proggy and crazy and even almost psychedelic effect to it, right? The touch and go and all these songs. Not a bad record, not by a long shot. Again, not a daily listener, but it's kind of like maybe what Love Beach should have been or could have been on the outset. Anyway, um, Wetton participates in a whole bunch of other projects. He has a long working relationship with Phil Manzanera. He carries on in Asia for the Moscow shows, the big the big post-communism boom of pop rock music in Russia that a lot of bands took advantage of. They make a big live show in Russia. They release live in Moscow. They release Now and Then, which is more or less a compilation with some new songs. And then Asia goes into the John Payne era, the John Payne period, which is very, very painful, especially to me, because I like that period a lot. John Payne, at least in my opinion, did more than a fine job. He did an amazing job. He did an amazing job. But he's not John Wetton. And Asia fans, being rabid as they are, they just hate him. I think that John Payne is the most disgustingly and unfairly treated rock star in the history of rock. He carried on the torch for Asia. And yes, it was a different band. The Asia with John Payne wasn't that happy-go-lucky, funny ha-ha-ha band. He gave it a very sinister, very serious, ominous kind of spin, both the music and the lyrics, kind of a depressing, almost like a dystopian. A lot of the lyrical themes were on such things. So that was him. And yes, he's no John Wetton, but again, he carried the band through so many changes and made some really, really great music, much more proggy and much more dark and serious than the original Asia was. And all he gets is a spit in the face, and as I'm going to touch on it, he got it also from the band themselves, which really they shouldn't have done. But anyway, after the 90s, ELP has another little revival, a little less death throbs or pre-death, what is it called, agonizing throbs, and they release Black Moon and In the Hot Seat. Both records are okay, kind of, I think they're mostly Greg Lake solo projects for the most part. I don't know how much input there was from Emerson and Palmer. Okay, good listens, nothing too striking or too special. If you want to complete the series, you want to have all the ELP records, it's worth having them. Otherwise, listen here and there is enough. And on the Wetton side, at this point, he begins his solo career in earnest, and he releases some freaking incredible records, beginning with Battle Lines, which I think overall is his best. Crazy record. Archangel follows, also good record. He does some other things, kind of side projects, or releasing the soundtrack and some other things. And then in 2000 or so, he starts working again with Jeff Downes of Asia, and they also release some phenomenal records. It's called Icon or Wetton-Downes. A lot of live rehashes of Asia and UK material. The most notable records was probably the first one, Icon. It's gonna be 2005 or so. There is a Rubicon, and there is a very, very beautiful and unique concert, a one-off concert that they played in a church in London, or at least England, with Dave Kilmister. Phenomenal musician, not very well known. Deserves much more fame. And it was an acoustic set, but it was a toned down set, not a lot of heavy, very electric stuff. There is some electric stuff, but they played the big hits from throughout their whole career. A lot of they did Starless, of course, and a lot of Go, and a lot of their solo material. Phenomenal. The year is 2009, if I'm not mistaken. I should have written it down. This is Wetton-Downes live in this and that church in London, 2009. If you're not familiar, look it up. They had a guest female vocalist. She was also very good. Phenomenal concert. Which brings us back to 2006, when Asia regroups the original lineup, and they release the three records, right? Phoenix, Omega, and 30 in 2008, 10, and 12. Great records, in my opinion. They don't have anything to be ashamed of, even when looking at the first Asia record. Just very good records. Yes, modern sounding, but this is the true Asia. But what is very interesting, that they lost that 80 poppy, happy-go-lucky, hey, ha ha ha, we holding hands, I love you, blah blah blah. That feel of the first two Asia records, or maybe even the third. So they sort of went along with John Payne, not as dark a vein as he was doing, but still a little bit more seriousness, a little bit more progginess. That the whole thing sounded more mature and more serious. And of course, Payne got zero mention, zero credit for anything he did. They even had a kind of a legal battle between them on the rights of the name. Anyway, they just, they regrouped without Payne knowing, and then one day they just told him, you're out of the band and we're regrouping. Very nasty stab in the back, which Payne really didn't deserve. So I don't know him on a personal basis, but it doesn't strike me like a kind of a, I don't know what, Yngwie Malmsteen, Richie Blackmore kind of person. I feel bad for him, because he really deserves much more credit than he gets. And after the ELP records, pretty much everybody from Emerson, Lake, and Palmer semi-retires, so they make solo projects, small projects, appearances. Carl Palmer is the most active. You don't see Lake a lot. Maybe he was doing some other things in the music industry, producing, helping. He has some sort of charity to help young bands, but no new music. And really in the hot seat, the last ELP record was the last thing he did. And then, of course, as one would expect, it didn't go well with Steve Howe and John Wetton. So Howe leaves the band again. They recruit a young guitar player, when Sam Colson did a fine job, and they release Gravitas. Also, very good record, very much in the same vein as the previous three, Omega, Phoenix, and 30. A little bit different, a little bit stepping back to the original Asia, the sound and the production and all of that kind of sounds much more like Asia 1, the first Asia, and a little bit like Alpha. So they stepped away a little bit from the dark streak, but not completely. And that's the last that I think that Wetton Records. And in late 2016, unfortunately, Greg Lake leaves this world due to cancer. And just a couple weeks later, 6-7 weeks later, on January 17, John Wetton follows him, unfortunately. Two great, crazy, phenomenal musicians, two composers, two bass players, two singers who had played twice or three times in the same band, right? They were in King Crimson, Asia, and maybe twice in the same band, but not at the same time. Anyway, I hope you like this, and thank you, Wetton, thank you, Lake, for the great music, and you rest in peace.